right?
Well, thanks for coming. It's been years since I've done what used to be the brown bag walks and lunch hour. And it was always so much fun finding a piece of our local history that had intrigued me enough to dig deep into it and then share it with people. Say, I never knew that. I was born here. So tonight they have asked me to try to limit my comments to myself and to Patricia, and I'll do my very best. And I was just telling Nina and Annabelle before everyone got here that my very first job in Powell that I started in March of 1978, because my ex-husband had been hired to work on the number 11 expansion, that the last new paper machine that we built was right here in this building. This is where Malaspina College was. And my office was in the front, and Joe Doubles was the administrator, and this was the library, and the little office where the financial stuff was done was the bookstore, and I sold the books to Michael Friedman, an artist, fantastic artist, one of the Lund bunch. What my administrator told me when I was out looking for a house to rent, because we were living in a hotel. So I said, I found my soul place. I know where I want. I have to live in Lund. And he said, there's nothing but overeducated, underemployed American hippies up there. I said, my people. So I didn't get to live in London. I got to live in Cranberry, but it was all good. And this is where it all started for me. Michael was part of that very, very active group of Lund expats, I guess, who made so much difference in this town, the things that got started, everything from Patricia to, well, I can't think of a whole list of things that they got involved in, but he was the one that introduced Powell River to art films, which I think is really appropriate given what we're talking about tonight with Patricia and its long history of doing films, and we've watched the flickering 16mm films down in the basement there. So this is home. This is home base for sure. So my name is Marcia Ann Albright. Oh, where did that come from? Yeah, that's my name, Nelson. And I don't answer to Marcia if I can help it. The hospital gets to throw their weight around a little bit. I've been here, as I said, since March of 1978. Roy took the job in December of 77. We've come straight from Northern Alberta, from a little bitty Cree village, Burrard, Michigan, one of the residential schools, one of the oldest ones in Alberta, because it was the home base of Bishop Emile Burrard when Burrard was being considered as the capital of Northern Alberta before the railroad tracks were diverted. So my history in Canada, starting in August of 1971 till the day I moved here, was in a village of 450 Cree people, and working at the residential school that had been turned into a vocational center by the province of Alberta, and bussed in adult students, Chipewyan, mostly Slavey, some Dogwood, but mostly Cree, and then some other people for whom English was not a first language, a few Polish, Ukrainian, French, the usual Northern Canada mix. And so for me, that was my introduction to Canada. That was that very, very small, closely knit community of people sharing everything from an orange moose meat that was frozen and they had to cut it with a chainsaw, to a ride on a horse if I needed, because my husband had taken the pickup truck to town 25 miles away. That was what represented Canada to me. And it was exactly what my heart had been looking for when I immigrated from the States. I was done. I was just so done. That was the year of the Kent State shootings. That was the year of all of the activism at the University of Washington, where I was completing my degree. And even though I lived in a very small rural community on Vashon Island, all of us islanders lived up on top of the island where the farms were. And the rich summer touristers owned all of the beachfront. But all of us kids had horses and boats anyway. That's just how you live. So moving from that environment to Northern Alberta and having that kind of introduction, that being absorbed literally into a family, a Cree family, very structured family. And the first words I learned, of course, were swear words. It's always like. really shaped my vision of what I was looking for in the rest of my life. I finally had to come back to those. I was compelled to come back to those because my guilt was growing up. You can't be born within sniffing distance of the Pacific Ocean, as I was in Southern California, live your whole life surrounded by salt, air, and live for very long in the Muskates. So I knew that this is where I wanted to be, but I didn't know how lucky I was when I got here. And so people who have asked why I hung on through all of the economic stuff that has happened in this town is because I can't imagine living anyplace else. I really can't. It's worth the effort. It's worth the work to make a job for yourself and to do without and amend things and to revert to all of those very, very thrifty habits that our Depression era grandparents instilled. I was only 9 the other day that I don't know. I don't have a lot of friends who probably sat there on a Sunday morning plucking the chicken in the kitchen that I had been feeding just the night before. And this is in Whittier, California, which is still part of Los Angeles. But I was fortunate that my grandparents were very recently transplanted from a rural environment, and it was no big hardship then to move to a very rural environment on Vashon, and then again up north, same thing, and become the lady that went out at dusk every night with my 22 and murdered as many spruce hens and prairie chickens and rabbits as I could to feed every little lady in town and carry them back in a gunny sack and distribute freezing critters. All of that came with me, all of that experience. And I have tried, as many of my friends will understand, for years to behave myself and act like a lady and pretend that I was brought up properly, not dragged through a knot hole backwards, as my grandmother would have said, or drugged through a knot hole backwards. But one of the most liberating things about having chosen Powell River as the place that's going to be my home, my cultural and my spiritual home, as well as my physical home, is that the older I get, the more I can exercise my inner hippie and just let it loose. And it doesn't seem to raise a lot of eyebrows. It's quite marvelous. So here I am at the end of a couple of eras in my life in Powell River, having owned gallery canvas and worked at it, been a marketing partner to the arts for years and years, as well as a student of art and anthropology when I was in college and university. But at the point at which it became apparent that the Patricia was not going to just rock on forever, just on momentum, and because it had stood this long, there had to be some kind of semi-divine intervention happen. That is the point at which my commitment to townsite and my realization that it is not something we can just take for granted. I had done until I went to work as the accounting for the regional district, and they had moved to one of the mill manager houses in townsite, and working there, living there, right above the mill, and absorbing the industrial relationship with the community. This is years before Shelley Halliday managed to get federal designation of the place as a national historic district. It inspired me, and at first it was, oh my God, what can it, I can't breathe. I can't breathe down here. What is all that crap flying around the air? And I think Carol and some of our other friends will realize and remember that it was fly ash on everything, blowing piles, open piles of sulfur. When you go to the Lionsgate Bridge and you look down there on the Chaplin shore, you see these great big mountains of sulfur. That's what they would bring up by barge load to the mill because it was a sulfite process. And these big open piles of sulfur were blowing in the wind. So people didn't get to say, okay, Monday's laundry day, Tuesday we do the ironing, Wednesday we do whatever. It was go out there and say, okay, no, please, wrong direction, you can't do the laundry today. Otherwise you're rewashing everything. And you remember those lovely car washes that we had for free that the mill maintained for us, one across the Granada and one down where you turn to go down to Garge Terminal? That was because the fly ash was etching into the paint of all of the cars. And for years, I didn't know this until the 80s when I was hired by what is now Work BC. It was clearly Work Opportunities for Women at the time. and the federal government to create a basic entrepreneurship training program. And I delivered that for 3 years through the college. And in doing all of the statistical background that was necessary to be able to teach people the essentials of marketing research and strategy and all of that stuff, I realized that for years, Powell River had the honor of having the highest per capita personal savings in accounts in Canada, the highest per capita personal ownership of pianos in Canada, the highest per capita personal ownership of automobiles in Canada, and the highest per capita personal ownership of radios. We were a prosperous little town. You think about the distorted Mercator maps that we've all been brought up with. Even with the distortion, Powell River's as far as you can go in continental Canada. We were the last frontier. The island doesn't count. This is as far as you could get by a combination of water and land and all of the other things, until you went to Port Hardy, and Port Hardy was just a shadow against what Powell River had become. So here we were, this prosperous little town, and survived the depression, survived the wars, survived all of these things. And we had an atypical relationship with the company that created the company town. You think about the history that we've all learned about Andrew Dunsmuir and his relationship with his company towns, like Cumberland is one of them. And I was just approached today by the mayor of Cumberland wanting some guidance, wanting to pick my brain about how they could get designated as a National Historic District too. And well, they should. They have some very distinctive things in their background, not least of which is Dunsmuir throwing some of the best buildings in pieces on the back of his flat cars and taking it on his railroad down to Ladysmith to form the basis of the commercial area of Ladysmith. So there was no thought given really to the permanent welfare of the people that were hired in those community towns, in company towns, and in a lot of them in the world. The best principles of the arts and crafts movement and the garden city planning movement were employed here and in a couple places in England. But the enduring relationship that we enjoyed with the company was so strong that when I moved here in the 70s, Roy would come home from work in the lunchroom crowd, and the guys would always say, well, they should do something. They should cough up more money for a fall thing. They should. I said, who's they? What's this they you're talking to? You guys got fees? And I found out that 20 years later, the town's expectation, the workers' expectation was still that the company would provide everything. It was very benevolent, journalistic, but benevolent, and not as intrusive as in a lot of company towns. And that's why we thrive. You'll hear stories from a lot of old timers about the mill's hiring standards and practices. And it's true. I've talked to some of the old timers. I was fortunate enough to move here and to become passionate about my own local history instead of still being lost in a fog of general history and prehistory and the rest of it, to actually make friendships with these people while the museum was employing a very innovative, pioneering program of doing oral interviews with the pioneers, and volunteers had to transcribe some of these. The recordings were not the best to start with. We are a little United Nations here, and we have a lot of very interesting accents. And of course, the older I get, the harder I find it to understand even just standard Canadian, never mind something exotic. But in the process of volunteering here in the museum after the college moved up to Gordon Park School, I became aware that there was more to this than just a place to put an ad in a paper and hired all comers with their own biases, their own ethnic and racial biases. Their assumption always was that people from Scotland were going to be great engineers and they were going to know how to fix things and make things, that people from Italy were going to know everything about masonry and plaster and stucco and woodwork, and also they were going to be able to grow great roses around it. And here there were all of these stereotypes that came with it. But the most significant difference between, from those stereotypes was their practice of saying, I see you've got great letters of reference here. I see you're a qualified mold maker. You can work in foundry, start tomorrow. But what do you do? Do you play bagpipe? Do you box? And what do you do? And that was what they were hiring for. They weren't hiring just for industry. They were hiring for community. And they wanted people who were used to pushing themselves in the pursuit of excellence, long before that became coined as a sort of inspirational phrase. So given that background, it's not surprising that we managed to survive all of the economic downturns, all the changes that have hit most of the resource extraction towns on the coast. Chemainus reinvented itself as the town of murals. Ocean Falls couldn't reinvent itself. There's a lot of comparisons that we can make, but we're here today because the company gave us such a strong, nurturing upbringing to start out with. So an example of all of this is the Patricia Theatre. And the Patricia Theatre, I like to start my stories with once upon a time, a long time ago, a long time ago. We have the diaries of Marjorie Henderson, who then married Ken Chaplin, who, when she was widowed, who started City Motors, and the convent down at Green Point. Dr. Henderson built that as a wedding present for them in 1931. And Stuart Alsgaard's granddad was the contractor. And when I was given permission to salvage these beautiful lanterns off the doorways down the convent, and they had to demolish it because they looked just like the old photos of the front of the theater, Stuart was very proud to tell me that his granddad ordered those up from Vancouver from a catalog. Our interconnectedness as an extended family is not as profound now as it was 40 some odd years ago when I moved here. And definitely not as profound as I know that my friends in the back row have experienced. But there still are connections. You pull on a thread and it will pull on another thread, and the spider web wiggles and the little dewdrops fall all over the place. But a long time ago, Marjorie, before she married, came here with her folks from Minnesota. Dr. Henderson and his wife were born in Quebec. Their parents were from Scotland. Doc's dad was killed in a tragic maritime accident. He was the steam engineer on a steamship, and it caught fire and sank. And so at a very young age, Doc was helping his mom raise the younger kids, put himself through McGill and the pharmacist first, sold patent medicine on horseback all over the maritime provinces, had a wonderful diary of his, and then went back to school and finished his training as a physician. And then his first real job after he decided he didn't want to live in Montreal any longer was to come out to Calgary. He was the first civilian surgeon and physician in Calgary. And he came to the end of the railroad, which was a couple of weeks by cayuse, as he said, from Calgary itself. And so he was the very first European civilian surgeon who was seconded to the railroad rebellion, unfortunately, but then he was able to go get his fiancee, bring her out with a little bird cage. And the first European child born in Calgary was their son. And he then followed the rest of his life with providing health care services for industry as much as possible. He worked for a lot of the railroad companies and mines and that. And he was a teaching doctor at a hospital in St. Paul, Minnesota. And that's where he met Dr. Brooke. And they seduced him out of semi-retirement with one last adventure on the frontier and brought him here by rail and by steamship to the coast to give his opinion on how they could create a modern, in 1908, a modern healthcare delivery system for this brand new mill that was going to be the first pulp and paper making mill on the Western Canada coast. There was an earlier one in Newfoundland, obviously. Grand River. Yeah. So he said, yeah, I'm in. A one-page contract, and the contract said that there would be a house provided that had running water, or his wife would kill him, There would be a hospital provided within a reasonable time to get him out of the bunkhouse. First it was a tent, and then it was a bunkhouse that they had to burn after a cholera epidemic here. And there would also be $1 stock from every man's pay envelope to fund a universal health care fund in this town. So we were the first Western Canada. Started with our beloved Doc Henderson. He also started the school district here. He enrolled his daughter Marjorie, who was a graduate RN, as a student, as a high school student. And he signed up all kinds of people so that we could have a school here. And there wouldn't be a golf course without him. There wouldn't be one woman without him. All of these things, the Boy Scouts, he started all of them. He was Mr. Powell, but his daughter Marjorie was a real firecracker too. Her diary is a hoot to read, and she was talked a number of times about going to movies. And the movies were in a tent. Everything was in tents, of course. And they had a hand crank carbide projector and a hand crank Victrola for music to go with it. And it blew down one too many times. And so some entrepreneurs in the summer of 1913 decided they were going to build a theater. And where the 7th Park is now, they built this thing that a lot of people have described as a shoebox on end that would kind of twist and sway in winds. The bats would fly through it. They fly through our Patricia too now.
Yeah.
Yes, I've had to have a few bats from time to time. They get seduced by the open doors and nice noises and stuff. They follow the mosquitoes right in the door and swoop around, and we have to put them back out the door. And that was a big deal. And they were going to have a naming contest for it. But suddenly, almost overnight, it had changed hands. And the story, unconfirmed in writing in place, but as part of our oral tradition, which is very rich, was that Bobby Scanlon, the son of one of the mill founders, who was also a mill manager, wanted a poker game. So what Bobby then set out to do was to get summer name. So they had a name guessing or proposing contest at the company store. And the prize was $50. $50 in 1913. $50 in 1913. That was as much as I earned in a whole month in 1961. But it was a big deal. And Mrs. Oliver, who was the wife of the customs officer, came up with the winning name, Patricia. And people ask all the time if it was a person. I said, yes, it was Princess Patricia. One of the granddaughters of Queen Victoria. She is this daughter of the Duke of Connaught Strathern, who had been appointed the Governor General of Canada a couple years before, and she was such a dashing young woman that she'd taken the whole country by storm, and that was why they had a postage stamp with her face on it, a pretty woman. And everybody wanted to have something for Patricia, Princess Patricia, so that's how it got named. And so they did fine. It was a flat floor. It was just like a general store, and it had a little shed roof. Is it going? Is that picture in there, Joelle? There was a little shed roof, and the guy could go up on a ladder and stand on the roof and put up the banners that they provided. There it is. There's a boxing contest, and there's a Charlie Chaplin movie, movies. And this picture was taken in about 1960 because I looked up when those movies were released. And what you can't see here is this nice lady with the crown has just won the dresser. The chest of drawers that's over there. It was a big deal. So it was a photo op, right? So here's this thing, frontier vernacular, nothing's recommended except it was the new hub of entertainment. And with a level floor, all of the chairs were kitchen chairs that were attached to 2x4s with the hinges. They could flip the whole thing back to scoop underneath it, and they could skid a whole row of chairs with their 2x4 thingies over to the sides of the room and set up a boxing ring. As it said, boxing contest. Now, these are people, this is local. These are people that came up on the steamship. And the steamship came, there were several different lines, but the most important ones came in 3 times a week. And the entertainment for town, whether it was the vaudeville acts or the boxing contestants or somebody with a trunk show, that the girls would all have been signing up to be models for the fashions or at the company store, arrived on Thursday. And so Friday and Saturday were big entertainment nights, and you would go out and and take in a live boxing match at the theater, or take in a fashion show at the theater, or even a concert at the theater. This was it. But Patricia was the hub of the community. It's all kind of well for the guys down in the #1 paper machine who were raised with the money to have a piano shipped up for themselves so they could have dances every week and then get flooded out when the penstocks broke. But that's another story. But this became the place to go. And so Patricia has, because I'm not counting this COVID nonsense, it doesn't count. Patricia has the honor, the distinction to be the longest continuously operating movie theater company in Canada. And it's only ever had 2 buildings, and our new building opened on November 6, 1928. And what happened to precipitate all of that was that in 1927, the Al Jolson talking movie came out, and the whole industry was agog. Just like, oh my God, how do we make this happen? Well, it took years for it to really happen, but they've proven that it could happen. So Bobby Scanlon used his influence as one of the managers and the son of one of the founders, and with his partner, Myron McLeod. And Myron was just a high school boy when he started working for Bobby down at the original theater. Oh,
sorry.
there, 1928. Yeah, I should. Is that a burn hole in the?
Yeah, that's the full.
I have a better picture. So there. Anyway, so 1927, they started carrying away, and I don't know if Joelle has included in this a view of the intersection of what is now Ash, used to be 2nd Avenue, and Marine, which used to be Ocean View. But there's 2 sets of tracks, train tracks coming through. One of them is standard gauge, and that's the one that the Lokis hauled the logs down to Boynton Beach on, down the face of the hill. And the other one was coming from the quarry up behind the ranger station. And that's where they hauled all the granite that they blasted to build breakwater for the wharfs for the mill and create the log pond essentially with the hulks. And all of the scrap granite is what has built all of the rock walls all along Marine, every place in town. But you'll see in that picture that there are 2 houses already there. The little white house that's right next to the lot down, that was the customs officer's house. I forget who lived in the house Joe King and Heather lived in next. The next one after the stairs was the guest house. And then all of the other houses along that way belonged to the local, the head engineer or the manager of Townside. When Bobby Scanlon was the manager of Townside, he lived in what became the Millview Units where Grant lives now. But all those big houses were built between 1914 and 1916. And then they started filling in workers' houses kind of all around that. But in that front row, there were 2 houses. And I couldn't tell you where they got moved to, but Bobby arranged for those houses and the 3rd one that was built when that narrow gauge track was decommissioned to be moved to other locations in the town side to clear the way so that starting in the summer of 1928, start building our new building. And we have the original plans that were issued for approval by Mr. Henry Holsby Simmons, the preeminent auditorium and entertainment venue designer in Vancouver at the time, in April of 1928. I have the original contract, which says how much they were going to spend, $28,500 to build it. We're going to have asbestos slate shingles on the shed roofs. The top was going to be tar and gravel. And that frontage, that's the 50s. Yeah. Well, the original canopy, which we are now in the process of restoring, with help from the provincial government, who loves restoration of heritage buildings that can become tourism destinations. So it serves 2 purposes. We not only get to enjoy the aesthetics of it and the distinction of it, but it also then helps our local economy by giving people one more cool thing to come and look at. And I just gave a tour to some people the other day who stopped by. They had been bicycling. There it is, we saw it. And she asked them how they had found it. Well, we came looking for it. This is what we were looking for in Townside. So we know we're the icon, the visual icon of Townside. And we just get them to slow down long enough to go to the brewery and go to base camp and go to Zeta and every place else. That's our mission in mind. So no, are they still clicking over, or do you have to do something?
Do you want me to keep it going, or I can?
Is it distracting to keep looking at the photos?
No.
Good.
All right.
Keep it going.
We'll keep
You
it on
don't-
the roll then.
You don't have to look at me, you can look at the photos, and if anybody has a question, I'll stop and talk about it. So, yeah, that was after they painted up the murals. The whole plan was to build this state-of-the-art little jewel box of a theater for the community on that very prominent corner. And Simmons did a fantastic job of adjusting to that weird angle. If there's a half dozen 90-degree angles in any of the interior or exterior walls in that building, I would be amazed. I'd have to go count them because he squished everything so that it was fit. That's Henry Pavitt. And somebody asked me how to pronounce his last name. He was born in Switzerland. It's Henri Pavitt, not Pavitt. Oh, that's right after we painted. Yes. That would have been 2004. Okay, never mind. Carrying on. So the whole development of that corner was tied to, of course, planned community, the development of Whitehall and the park, because they realized after the First World War, after the flu epidemic, after developing half of Newtown, which is the crescent along the hill above the old golf course, that we needed to graduate into big community status and have our own community hall, as it were. And so again, the company spared no expense to build this beautiful structure, which we still have, with a strong hardwood dance floor and the Masonic temple facilities in the basement and the library in the basement, all the stuff. And they couldn't, of course, develop an appropriate landscaping plan for it until that ramshackle shoebox got moved. So that's why, that was 1927, 1928. They started building on the 6th of July. 4 months, a day later, they opened. They showed their last movie at the old theater to anybody who wanted to come. The first movie at the new theater was by invitation only, and the Lieutenant Governor came up to Victoria by steamship. It was a big deal. It was a very big deal. And they had hired the famous lady, a pianist. The organ hadn't been delivered yet, so she had to play piano for everything. And then the Robert Orton organ finally arrived and was installed. It became the mainstay of the place. And then after that was the last screening at the old theater, so it's literally overlap and never stopped unless we have something to repair, which happens from time to time. So the name came with it, of course. Along the way, Bobby Scanlon's wife developed various illnesses and ailments and only could thrive if she could live in San Francisco again. So they moved, and Myron bought out Bobby, and it became, it had gone from being Patricia Entertainment, gone from being the Cloud Scanlon Amusements to being the Patricia Entertainment Company that it is. So when we finally bought it, I'll fill that in, we went back, we reverted to the historical name for the company, because we wanted everything that could resonate with its beginnings to be reestablished. Because I recognized at the time that it wasn't going to be enough just to get people to come back to the theater, because they got used to Mr. McDonald having the furnace on, the boiler was on a timer. And when I first started, I had to go down these horrible stairs into the boiler room and push the timer at 4 o'clock every day. And do you think it was warm enough for human habitation by 6:30? No, so that was the deal. And so I went to one of my favorite furnace people. I said, does it really save that much money to turn the damn thing off overnight? And he said, for that much air, 500,000, no, it's 5,000 square feet. I forget what the cubic feet is, 20 feet high. So it's 10,000 cubic feet, something like that. No, it does not heat up in 2 hours. So we changed all of that. We went on a timer that only altered the temperature setting by maybe 5 degrees from nighttime to daytime. And it didn't smell as bad anymore. It was amazing. It's just amazing. You get all that dankness out. And Mr. McDonald had let the roof leak for so long under that swamp cooler he had on the roof. So he could advertise air conditioning, but the roof had rotted. He didn't want to change the roof out, was finally bullied into doing it when we had lured the BC Festival of Performing Arts, the BC Festival of Arts here. They gave him a contract for 2 weeks of screenings there if he would fix the roof. So in 1996, he finally fixed the roof. But by the time we took it on in 2002, none of the damage had been repaired, and the beautiful velvet curtains had all been pinned together with diaper pins because they were all rotted out in the panel, and I mended them as best I can. But you know, see, I know there's more. I mean, that's the carpet.
Tell you about the carpet.
That's in the carpet. We have scraps of that carpet that were left behind me by the installers up in the dressing room, and I've got a piece in the display cabinet with all of our other little archival bits and pieces. And yes, the seats, there were 450 seats in that puppy. 28 on the balcony, which should have been the premier seats, and which were reserved for our neighbors. They were restricted to that area because the common opinion was that they stunk that because of the fish and the smoke and all the things that were very familiar to me and homey. But that ended in the 60s. Fine. When I moved here, they still had signs on the Rodney that had nothing to do with race or ethnicity, but we had the women's entrance. No, we had ladies and escorts, and we had men only, still at the Rodney in 1977, believe it or not. So Powell River did hang on to some of its traditions a lot longer than other places thought that they needed to, for sure. But originally, let's see, 450 seats, 28 on the balcony, a double row, which you could never get away with now because the balcony was over that high. And 28 seats amongst the 4 loge boxes, 4 and 3, and you could reserve a seat in the loge box. And we have pads with a little reservation form, substitute, 850 cents more. And you talk to some of my older friends who did their courting at the Patricia, and they were always impressed, the women were always impressed when the dates sprang for that extra 50 cents for the loge box so that they could do a little discreet canoodling in the under the overhang of the balcony in the back row. And then for all the peasants, there were another 390 some odd seats. It went right down to the orchestra pit. And if you look very carefully, even though it's been painted over a jillion times, there's still little footprints embedded in paint showing how close. And I've only been to one multiplex in my life now since Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I remember going in there, and it wasn't shaped like a real auditorium. We're used to auditoriums being, the auditorium is perpendicular to the stage. That's how you get the good acoustics. That's how you get the good sidelines. But this place in Santa Fe, it was parallel to the screen. And every place you sat in it, you were sitting like this, scroll back and forth. It was so uncomfortable. And I imagine that's how it had to have been for those front row seats. And the only people that wanted to sit in them were the kids that brought in their pea shooters and their peas to shoot at the bad guys on the screen, judging by the amount of cleanup. And I know this firsthand because Frank Haslam was still alive when we had our first birthday party at the theater. And one of the things that I wanted to do to observe the just the recreation of the feel of the place was to have a family reunion. Everybody who had ever worked at any of the businesses in the Patricia, ever, from whenever to present, was welcome to come. We invited the whole town. We had a couple of days of tours and a big cake. Newell made a beautiful cake and hand sealed it, drew the front of the theater on it. So we had treats and stuff, and a little concert and a silent movie. And Frank Haslam was able to come. He was 103 at the time. And his first job was sweeping up down at the old theater and flipping the chair, rows of chairs back, sweeping and flipping them down again. And he got to get into all the movies for free and get free popcorn down there. And you will have noticed in that, see, that's not our photo. In the photo of the original Patricia, you'll notice there was a popcorn thing, a machine, something on the front porch as well. I think it's big enough the photo's big enough to see it. But otherwise, there was never any food allowed in the Patricia until 1955. In 55, the mill sold most of its shares to Nicola Bledel. That only lasted for 4 years before the descendants of the original owners stomped out of a big board meeting down in Vancouver and said, you can take business practices and put them someplace rude because we don't want to do business with you. Buy the rest of our shares, we're out of it. But what happened immediately in 55 is that Nicola Bledel started having all the houses appraised and then started selling them to the tenants, the workers that were tenanted in them, and selling houses to be moved to Westview, all over Redonda Avenue. There's 3 or 4 houses up on Manson, and then tearing down Riverside, so that because the houses were too heavy to come across the bridge, across the penstocks, and they needed to build the first craft mill over on that side. But the big change was for Mr. McDonald. They were already fighting with competition from television. It was tough all the way around. Town was getting gutted. The new mill owners were pretty much forcing a shift to Westview, which was a tiny, tiny little village at the time for almost all the commercial and institutional activity. That means all the banking, all of the governmental offices. By 1959, they had hired an expert from England to rename and renumber all the streets, because each of the 4 villages or hamlets had a First Avenue, Second Avenue, Third Avenue. Each and every one of them had a fir, a dogwood, a cedar. So they came up with a theme for each of the 4, eliminated all the numbered streets, came up with a cohesive numbering plan that went from north to south on Marine, and then they instituted home delivery. But up till that point, there was a post office in each of the 4 villages or hamlets, and people went to the post office to get their mail. And our post office now is the brewery, of course, but it housed all the federal offices. And it was built in 1939, as was the provincial building. The 2 governments, the provincial and federal government, deciding almost simultaneously to do something to boost morale towards the end of the Depression, and just on the brink of the Second World War being. So the federal building cost 3 times as much as the provincial building, even though it's not as big, but it had all that decorative brickwork. But it also housed the telegrapher's office, the customs officer's office, as well as the post office. The provincial building had the provincial police, the courthouse, the jail, the dog licensing people, the radio licensing people, everybody. The judges' chambers are one of the nicest rooms upstairs. The kitchen over there was the vault for the clerk of the courts, and the whole restaurant was kind of, that's where you went to buy your license. That's where you went to pay your fines, all of that stuff. The jail was in the basement. It was like at London, the jail was in the basement of the hotel. You have to get close to that too. So in 55, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Cloudritter, was determined that he was going to still be here and provide the service, even though he was living in Vancouver by that time. He was getting older, and he had local people who were collecting the rents and doing all the stuff for him. But he was very, very much in touch with the industry. Vancouver has not just recently become Hollywood North. It was Hollywood North along with Seattle in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. It was a big deal, and we were still on the vaudeville circuit. We had a lot of big names come through, a lot of lesser names like Miss Faye Baker and her modern fan dance. I have a newspaper ad for her performance here at Patricia, and then a more adult performance now for Broadway the next night. So Byron had been part of the war bond effort and the raise money to buy our own planes. All of anything that needed doing in town. Byron McLeod was the man that made it happen. This was after Doc Henderson had died, of course. And the place that you went was to the Patricia. And all the stories that you hear and every story you can read that has been captured so far depicts the upstairs office of the Patricia with its safe that got broken into in the Bagley Fawcett robbery as being the nerve center for the dissemination of news and fundraising and all of the big things that Byron thought the town should have. The original lacrosse pit, is the pitch of lacrosse? What is it? Lacrosse block. It was down in the front yard of Broadway, and then the ball diamond was off to the left, and then off to the right, about where the security shack is now, is where the pig pens were. which must have been really attractive for me getting off the stage. So he was a go-getter, and he was the man that started the Board of Trade and the Chamber of Commerce, all of it. So when he found out what a killing the theaters in Vancouver were making from popcorn, he bought a popcorn machine in, by golly, and he put the popcorn machine right in the middle of the lobby, right for that mirror they got covered over where they were modernizing stuff. And the next thing you know, Jack Dunning, who had bought the sweet shop, which was next door, got his knickers all twisted and broke his lease and moved his cafe down to the Powell Stores building, the new Powell Stores building in 1941. And then that cleared space for the first hairdressers, and that was Barb's classic coiffure, Barb Kaufman. Brenda Powell's mom had her first business there. And then when it became Val's Christine was in there. And then when Mr. Alsgaard built his new building uptown, when he did on Marine, he made room for Christine to come up there and bring her laser hair thingies. I don't know what she did. I know one of those esthetician things that I know nothing about. So that popcorn machine was the pivot point for the survival of the theater against the onslaught of televisions, and also opened up the sign store to other kinds of industry besides the sweet shop, where you should be able to get milkshakes and candies and bottle pop. For the first couple of years that I was there, I was determined to create a garden. Well, for several reasons. One of them was because I couldn't stand not having a garden. One of them was because I needed some privacy, and it was so exposed on that hillside. It was just naked, just green grass, and people riding by can see you no matter what you were doing. And the other one was there were no birds, there was nothing. So we started building my garden in 2003, 2004, and now it is a jungle, which Nina is going to impose park standards on, because she's more of a gardening Nazi than I am. And it will
We still get along really well.
She does these things on down the path. What the hell happened to Rosa? It's not grabbing my hair anymore. So part of, and I realized very quickly that not only was I benefiting by greening up that hill and softening it, it was cooling the building. It was attracting all kinds of wildlife, not just the deer and the bears and the raccoons and the odd cougar, but the birds and the snakes and all my little friends and butterflies and stuff. But it was causing people to slow down at the only stop sign between Alberni and Lund. And they were looking around like, whoa, that looks interesting. And you could see people saying, oh, I wonder what this is, and turning and parking. I'm like, okay, so this is how we're gonna look them. We're gonna stop them at that stop sign and give them something to think about. So I asked Stuart Alsgaard, who was the mayor at the time, what had happened to the plaque, the big federal designation plaque that cost them bazillions of dollars, and that they have always said was one of their proudest moments, because they love getting to do some of the relief castings of some of our buildings, our little building, as well as the street plan. And then, of course, the whole thing about why we were selected. And I said, where is that anyway? And Stuart says, I don't know. We should find out. And it was languishing in the basement of City Hall because the city doesn't own any land here, except at Whitehall. They had gotten the old Elks Club levies on a tax sale after it burned down, and that's the land that Steve Brooks just bought when they created the beer gardens, where that staircase is down. But that's the only land city owned. And I said, was there a way around this? He said, well, yes, there's some landowner in town side really off the host it. I'm sure we can work something out. So we got the federal park sign there, and Michael Scott, our predecessor, had salvaged the old Ministry of Highways sign that had a viewpoint that talked about the mill being the world's largest producer of newsprint and all this stuff. And he wanted to have some, so he had got those posts installed kitty corner from it, and he put that up. So in centennial year, we took that down and donated it to the mill so that they could put it up on their memorial lawn that they were creating when the old steam plant went. And we got the memorial, the founders bronzes, and Hans Hilde lettered our sign for us. And that is now that's our little centennial park, our federal park. And it does draw people. It provides photo ops for everybody. And I tell you, people from the Pacific Rim countries love having a chance to take their photos with something that is iconic like that. So there's been a strategy all along, from my point of view, as an entrepreneurial type of person, to create an environment around the Patricia that, as I said, not only preserves it for our benefit, because we are isolated here. We have very few threads, well, we have very robust threads, but very few threads in our little cultural tapestry. And to lose cinema, after having lost vaudeville, would have been catastrophic. So pandering to all of that, I joke about this. I turned myself into a media slut. Anytime anyone would ask if I wanted to do an interview for either Shaw TV or CBC, anybody, I did it. I did it, whether I was comfortable with it or not. You will not believe it, but I was one of the shyest people on the planet before I took on the Patricia, because I couldn't afford to be shy anymore. And it was important enough to me that we started valuing Townsite for what it has to offer the whole town, and that people got that Patricia wasn't everyone welcome that to Townsite. So that's what we've been about. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. I told you that Bobby Scanlon won, we're pretty sure he won it in the McCartney, and then brought Myron in as his partner quite soon after. Myron then took over completely, and so from 1928, when the theater opened, Bobby wasn't even in the picture. Myron ran it, either by himself or with trusted people here in town, till 1979. In 1979, he sold it to Bruce and Maya McDonald, who were retired school teachers from Sydney or Sydney. And they ran it until 1999. Michael Scott talked the credit union into making what turned out to be their first and worst commercial loan ever. And he bailed in 2002, saying he was going to throw a Molotov cocktail over his shoulder because he was so fed up with his town not appreciating everything he was doing on theater. And I felt like saying to him, because I had been trying to say this Fanny with the feds and do his GST stuff for him, and Brian was helping with the projectors. But, it's probably because you never finish anything you say you're going to do and you don't pay your bills, Michael. But I didn't really want to be that brutal. But what it ended up coming down to is the credit union asked Brian if we would babysit, because they were going to foreclose on Michael. And we babysat it for a year while they went to foreclosure. And September of the next year, 2003, they said, well, you've done really well. Do you want to keep going? I said, no, don't have any capital, don't want to buy any business, just lost gallery talents a couple years ago. No. Well, we got talked into doing it. They made us an offer we couldn't refuse, so that my guilt wouldn't chase me in an early grave. And so we took it on an agreement for sale, with no capital invested. And we're building towards sweat equity. And that was the year I turned 60, so all my Canada pension went into it and any other work that we did. And that's what we've done for the last 19 years. October 1st will be 19 years that we've been running it for the community. And I think that it may have shortened my life expectancy a little, but it's okay. I'm going to bounce back. I know I will. But it was remarkable. And think about what I just said there. 108 years. In 108 years, there's only been 4 owners. Wow. 4 owners. Isn't it amazing? Yeah. When you think about it? Yeah. And one of the owners only lasted 2 years, so he hardly counts. Yeah. But the continuity, the passion, the investment of the families and the people that have worked there they're remarkable on any scale. I think even I'm talking about my son and all of our friends like Kathy and Kiana and Nina, was the under gardener of Bouchard North, but now is the head gardener. whether she wants to be or not. And we'll be looking to expand the cadre of volunteers to work under her direction. So now we're getting ready to pass the baton on. I figured when we started, I could work till I was 70, that was a big deal. I was feeling great. We did a whole lot of renovations that everyone will remember. Painted the outside, which needed happening. Built my garden, made a suite upstairs, got a new screen, fixed the bathroom so there was handicapped access. Did a lot of stuff and finished it. Got the murals all restored thanks to Whitney LaFortune and a bunch of volunteers who had some to none artistic ability, but she would get them started painting ivy and flags or whatever she could give them safely to do. And we've always had an active support group, small but active, in the Friends of the Historic Patricia Theatre Society. And Helena Sandler helped us get some fantastic parlor concerts going on Sunday afternoons when everybody feels good about going out to a concert instead of the dark and the rain and all the rest of it. And it that went on for a few years until Susan Brixton passed away, because she was one of our mainstays with the vocal stuff that we were doing with Roberta and then Walsh Martello. And so many people have given us, have shared their energy and their skills and their talent, because they knew that Brian and I were working for volunteers too. We've never taken a paycheck, and it's no big deal. It just what was necessary. But I think it empowered other people to be very generous with their time and their energies, and as I say, their talents. And now we're in a new era. Like I said, I'm following group club at 70 because I participated in all of the renovations. I'm tearing things out and doing 1,500 square feet of floor upstairs on my hands and knees, pulling out nails and scraping off old linoleum. And then at 70, I thought, oh, okay, I could probably do it till I'm 75. 75 is cool, I can probably do this. But after the Springford head failure in 2014 on August 29th at 6:15 in the morning, we were down for 11 weeks. Even though the insurance covered all of the repairs and the restoration work, you never get that 11 weeks of revenue back. And if you're already on a shoestring, that could have been the end. And the credit union figured out a way to give us a mortgage, even though we didn't qualify. The business never qualified for mortgage, but they did it to consolidate the debt and to help us develop a succession plan, because I was old. And they knew that if they lost me, Brian probably wouldn't show up for all he did, but I'm not really saying that.
Begrudgingly.
Not living there and going to work on the computer in the night with nightgown, night clothes. So we started developing a succession plan with the old Friends of the Historic Patricia Theatre Society. And it was challenging, it was daunting. It's a huge challenge. And it became apparent that the key to survival for the theater was to employ the fact that it was the only game in town that would allow the Digital Film School and the Powell Film Society, what is now the Film Society, but was the Friends of Film of Powell River that was doing the film festivals and stuff, to continue to having a venue, because the community had really rallied in 2012 and Disney forced the hasty conversion to digital. And so the only equipment that was usable was in the theater. So a marriage of convenience was proposed between the charity, the Film Society, that wanted to continue delivering its charitable objectives, which are education around education and cultural expansion, opportunities through film, not just through viewing film, but through being part of making it and then being part of the critiquing of it and all of that stuff. And their need for a venue to continue doing that in, and the passion that the Friends of the Theater had for preserving it, because even though I have held back from having it designated by bylaw, it is on the register of heritage buildings. The credit union wouldn't let me designate it while we had an agreement for sale. I had an opportunity while we had mortgage, but I decided that it was not prudent. I was getting ready to do it actually when COVID hit, but it wasn't prudent in terms of the future of the theater if I limited the possibilities for what might have to happen. if the film society and the community couldn't raise the money to save it. Well, so here we are with a heritage building that has yet to be designated, that is imminently eligible and is considered heritage by the province and feds already. And we have a society that has programs to deliver, and that we're in the process right now of handing on the baton. And at some point in this whole journey, and I know it's almost oh, it is, that's not slow.
Yeah,
It isn't.
It's 7:30, so you good.
I'll shut up in just 2 minutes.
You can have another 10 if you want.
The original response to this proposed marriage of convenience was, oh, we don't want business, oh, no, we never buy a business. We've always got problems. We will buy the equipment, and we'll buy the building, and we'll buy property. And at some point, the new board, members of the new board, looked more deeply into it and said, well, hell, we're leaving money on the table here. We're better off if we do buy the business for a lot of complicated accounting reasons and do GST and a bunch of other stuff. So we kind of did one of those Zorro things and jumped from one horse to another horse while it's galloping through the rapids, and moved from a very tidy little succession plan that involved Gary leading the charge to raise enough money through donations and financing to buy the building and the equipment to, oh, well, hell, let's buy the whole damn business. But it is a different legal procedure. So instead of actually managing to put off in sometime in, well, we got an extension, it was going to be May, but it couldn't be May, then it was going to be August, but now it's going to be, I think, September 30th, everybody luck.
The 29th, as I understand it. because-
I can't understand you.
The 29th, as I understand it, because the 30th is now a statutory holiday, so.
That's
So
right.
we will close it on the 29th and somehow date it on the 30th, so it matches your end, and it's all.
So we don't have to do a stub year end.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, well, so stay tuned. You talk about the perils of Pauline at the matinees. This has just been ongoing. But the good news out of all of this is that even though the Film Society, Amalgamated Film Society and Friends of the Theatre was halted in their tracks after Gary had launched the fundraising at the film festival in 2020.
2020, yeah, 2020.
2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, I had to shut the theater down. There were no gatherings. There was no way we could have events. There was nothing that we couldn't do anything. We're just down. And so my responsibility to the credit union was to have another plan and to be prepared to sell it on the open market if I had to. And I had people stepping around. But all they wanted to do was one of those English Bay developments where you keep the facade and they build condos behind it.
Yeah.
Or they bulldoze the whole thing and build bigger condos on the whole lot. So this was our not only our best and only chance, but the ideal solution for the community. For a society to take it on that is a charity already, that has people on its board that value the heritage contribution, the contribution to heritage tourism, and just the fabric of our own personal family album of memories, and is prepared to find the people, the cadres of volunteers to do the restoration work and to help with the garden and to help with all kinds of things that we pretty much just did pretty low key in the past. So yeah, it's happening. It's going to happen, and I found a place to live. I think anybody who's ever seen my posts on Facebook knew that I was getting boringly frantic about what's going to happen to me in the 3 cats. I just buy this picture of me, 3 cats on Volvo and sleeping in the back. But this is my last silly story about myself, and then I'll get a question. I was reading the obituary in the Powell Peak to my good friend Wendy Brown, who had been in exile, trapped by COVID in Ontario for the whole last year. And as I was reading it to her, I thought, I had one of these light bulb moments. I thought, oh, this is so terrible. I'm the only one that knows where Dan used to live and who the property manager is. So as soon as I got off the phone, I called Lilia and I said, so what are you going to do about renting out the apartment after the funeral? And she said, I don't know. We haven't had any turnover since I started managing it for Rebecca because she's in Bella Coola. I said, well, what are you gonna make a list, you know? Can I go on the list? And she said, well, honey, you are the list right now. I said, yes. So that my grandmother, all of my grandmother, everybody, all the aunties are spinning in their grave, I'm sure. That's not how I was brought up. But I have a home. The 3 cities, and I have a home, and it's in a heritage building, a charming 1916 building, just a walk away from the theater. And so I will still be here to haunt everyone in town. I'm even closer to Henderson House because I'm still president of the Heritage Society. So now that's me. That was lots about me. That was all about Patricia. Yeah. Questions? Did I keep everybody awake? I saw a couple nods. I did. I was trying to get to the end here. Ask.
I got one for you, Anne.
Can you take your mask off? So
Yes,
I'm
I
almost
can.
deaf. I'm sorry.
What's your favorite memory of the Patricia or operating with Patricia?
I had a couple.
All right.
The first time we did the vagina monologues, and we did a late night one of that, and we had fire spinners out in the middle of the street, and the cop that was called by the neighbors was one of my music friends, and he had his penny whistles in his jacket, so we went back inside and started making music, and he said, why do you want to keep them out of the middle of the street? I love that. I love doing the vaudeville and burlesque shows, and I love doing the live performances. And I love the concerts. I love the live concerts. In terms of the best movie experience I've ever had there, Rocky Horror. that had the costumes were epic, just epic. Yeah, 19 years, Joelle. I've got a lot of memories. I have seen thousands of movies, thousands, and it some of it has been overshadowed by worry, financial worry, my health, my age, my dragging my carcass up those 19 stairs to the office and suite, and now on the 19 stairs again. But yeah, some pretty epic times there, and I'm hoping that we will again. For me, the biggest challenge and the most pride I can take in the operation of it was finding the sweet spot that served every demographic in town in terms of programming. The only thing I've never brought in is an R-rated movie, and I wouldn't, and limiting the 18A movies even to just a few a year meant that almost everything that we offered, most people would say, well, yeah, I would like to see more blood and violence, but I get you gotta have kid stuff sometime, or chick flicks sometime, or art house movies sometime. But yeah, that's the thing I take the greatest pride in. Any other questions? No questions?
No, I wanted to give you a memory when the kids were little, we used to come behind the Patricia Theatre when the carousel was there.
Yeah.
So I always thought that was your carousel.
The one at Wicklow?
Yeah.
Mr. McDonald got so choked when he moved down to Seashell.
Yeah.
Every time, and he would never tell anybody when he was coming. He would show up and he'd say, well, you know, if nobody's gonna come, then I'm not coming. I said, you can tell us that you're coming, and you tell people.
Yeah.
And all these retired millwrights kept offering to keep it in order for him, and then keep the key and all that. No, nobody can touch it with him. So he had it tore it all apart, and early bird take it down to Seashell on their on his flatbed. And then he got all choked because every place that he was looking for to reassemble it down to Seashell, they wanted him to post the scheduled hours.
Right. Gosh, you think?
Yeah. So those were good times.
Yeah, for sure.
Any other question before I release you to your coffee, tea, cookies, and other stuff? Nina?
I want you to tell them about the fellow who was redoing the floor in the office and had a ghostly experience.
Oh, yeah, there have been a lot of genuine ghost experiences. Walter Martella is one of the ones that has had 2 different experiences in the building. But when Darren Nivens came to town, he was looking for work as a floor refinisher. We knew Jamie Scarrett was going to be trying to retire. And he had done a deal with Chris and Shona Scott to do all the floors at the hospital at St. Luke's. And did a beautiful job. And he came to me and asked if I would let him do all the floors, if I do all the prep, and then let him do all the floors upstairs, and just pay for advertising for his business and just pay for all the materials and stuff. He said, oh yeah, I think we can work that out. Sure. And so he was working all hours because he had a side job as well. And we had moved everything out of the office that we could. The safe was out. The safe that the Bagley Fossil robbers had flipped on its face and blown the back off of it years ago was out on the balcony by the projection. The big desk was out on the balcony. Everything was out, and he was on his hands and knees using the edging sander. And he just kind of saw some movement and looked up. And there, sitting on the desk with his ankles crossed, his legs swinging, and thumbs in his little vest pockets, big beaming smile on his face, was a man that I know from the description was Myron McLeod. But it just, Darren just, 2 in the morning, he just, what is going on here? And yeah, it was a very moving experience for him, for sure.
Wow.
That was Myron, giving us his, Myron McLeod giving us his blessing.
Aw.
It's really kind of, yeah,
Yeah.
special.